Welcome to the Hobby School of Public Affairs celebration of the life, work, and legacy of Governor Bill Hobby. In a world of 15-second Instagrams, WhatsApp, X, Snapshot, TikTok, and LinkedIn, we pause today to celebrate the timeless life and work of Governor Bill Hobby, indelibly captured and preserved in the just released book. Hope each of you will get one of these. This is the Bill Hobby, A Life in Journalism and Public Service. The book chronicles how Bill Hobby has navigated and influenced events and people, and optimizes the decision-making outcomes that we're all familiar with. Former Lieutenant Governor Bob Bullock spoke of his dear friend, Governor Hobby, and expressed the admiration and respect, saying that Governor Hobby solves problems and turns them into opportunities. As we look at the future and we get a glimpse of AI and the changing current news conditions, a significant new set of problems is going to emerge. And linking education to employers is going to build the workforce of, and to do so in a way that not only rewards those who are engaged in the education process with a centric self-supporting opportunity, but preserve the critical thinking skills. I think this is certainly a legacy that the Hobby School is seeking to preserve from the great work that Governor Bill Hobby has done. Just as Bob Bullock reflected on his dear friend Bill Hobby, saying that Hobby solved problems and changed them into opportunities, so will the living legacy of the Hobby School produce future decision makers to solve problems and turn these solutions into opportunities. Appreciation belongs to Don Carleton and to Erin Purdy for capturing Governor Bill Hobby's life and works so that future students will be mentored by those examples for generations. Thanks to Jim Granato. Jim Granato, the Dean of the Hobby School of Public Affairs, keeps the flame burning. We thanks to Paul Hobby and Janet Hobby, Laura and John Beckworth, Kate and Steve Gibson, Andrew Hobby, for sharing the third generation of Hobby family commitment to education. I'll give a special thanks with Paul's indulgence to Dolores Chambers, who I think is an adopted member of the Hobby family and makes things work. By the way, when Paul Hobby talks about the fourth generation of Hobby's commitment to education, his comment is, "You haven't seen anything yet." With that, I might ask the third and fourth generation of the Hobby family to please stand and let us express our appreciation. Where's Steve? Steve, where are you?
Oh, there's Kate.
All right, there he is. Special thanks also to a former chairman of the Board of Regents of the University of Houston, Beth Robertson, who has worked tirelessly for the success of the Hobby School. Beth, where are you? Close. There you are. Madam Provost, you and President Couture have and will continue to serve the Houston community, the state, and the nation with the world-class U of H educated graduates. And the Hobby School will be a gem in the crown of the University of Houston. Governor Hobby We celebrate your heritage of successful past, our productive present, and promising future made possible by your sustaining, unwavering commitment to education and improving the lives of all those you've touched. And now it's my honor and pleasure to recognize Provost Diane Chase. She is University of Houston System and University of Houston Chief Administrative Officer and Provost, a renowned researcher and administrator who is passionate about the success of students and faculty. As President Couture has often stated, Provost Chase brings exemplary experiences and transformational ideas to elevate the student experience across the U of H system. We're honored to be here with you today, Provost Chase.
Thank you, Ashley. And thank you all for attending this evening's reception and discussion. I know everyone is looking forward to tonight's conversation. I know that I am. Many of you know I'm an archaeologist, and as such, I'm a little bit obsessed with the past and about context. So I particularly enjoy learning about people, places, and cultural events that shape previous generations and that continue to impact our communities today. As provost, I enjoy conversations that delve into topics relevant to our different colleges and their respective students. Tonight's event will have something for everyone, and I'm truly glad that the University of Houston is hosting it. Bill Hobby's legacy looms large at UH. Obviously, one way is through his namesake school, the Hobby School of Public Affairs. In a short time, the Hobby School has truly become an important part of this university. Its research on public policy, elections, and other factors affecting our city and state are helping disseminate critical information to stakeholders across Texas. And its interdisciplinary degree programs are supporting students seeking careers across a range of industries. Likewise, the many fellowships offered through the Hobby School are preparing students for professional opportunities in public service. The students who emerge from this school will no doubt be ready for supporting their respective cities and communities, much like Governor Hobby has done throughout his career. In fact, the former Texas Lieutenant Governor also served as Chancellor of the University of Houston System. One of his legacies as former Chancellor was his role in bringing UH's first academic programming to Fort Bend County. 30 years later, UH is still there and stronger than ever, and in fact, we're about to inaugurate another building. We're celebrating 3 decades of higher education in Sugar Land and beyond, and looking forward to even more success in this area. His contributions to our state and our university have been tremendous, and tonight's event is just another example of his strong and lasting impact on Texas and Texans. Again, thank you for attending this evening's talk, and thank you, Dean Granado and Hobby School, for continuing to host insightful events such as this one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Provost Chase. I just looked at the run of show, and it says I'm supposed to do this for 5 minutes. And spoiler alert, I don't really have 5 minutes of material, but I did go to law school. I can dig deep and come up with something. The primary expression, the primary emotion is just gratitude. I look out there, and Dolores Chambers is, in fact, an adopted member of the family, but there are many of you out there. I could start singling you out and making you blush, but as I look across this room, the many decades of friendship and loyalty and working together on one thing or another, it moves me. It moves me. So thank you for all you've done. Thank you for your tolerance of us. Thank you for your presence today. I could talk a little bit about the origins of this book. I certainly need to thank Don and Erin for their not just tireless work, but meticulous work, and it has yielded something that has taught me many things about my family I didn't know. Most of them good, most of them good. But let's sort of tie the book together with the hobby school, since this is that occasion and we're doing that. When he told me that his sort of last big wish on earth was to have the Hobby Policy Center turned into a policy school, I'm like, okay, all right, let's get that done. And so Beth and Jim and I got together and we met with then Provost Paula Short and obviously Chairman Renew Couture. And we said there are only two sacred precepts here that define his legacy, and one of them is data. You know, he's data-driven is the favorite phrase today, but he was data-driven long before that was cool, which is one way of saying that he was a huge nerd. A quant like you wouldn't believe. Kate remembers, like I remember, you know, his idea of unwinding at night was to do 5 pages of tensors calculations in the back of a Mensa book. I'm not making that up. That's true. And I did not inherit any of that, and I don't regret it. I don't regret it. But because God is providential, he found his nerd twin. He found his soulmate in Jim Granato. And so, you know, how that happened is mysterious and wonderful, but that we're all sitting here today and that Jim is dean of the hobby school, that's divine providence at work. The other sacred tenet was that the hobby school has to be applied. And applied means it has to be what public policy can be, not what public policy should be. You know, God created the Kennedy School to do airy white papers that mean nothing to nobody except people at the Kennedy School, because none of it is politically practical or affordable or achievable. If there are any Kennedy School people in here, I don't apologize. You're just an easy target. When I say applied, he was about, you know, I mean, the primary proof point is look at the title of his autobiography. It's how things really work. You know, I probably could sit down right now. But the most famous thing he ever said was the legislature does one thing. We meet every 2 years to do one thing, and that is to write an appropriations bill, which expresses the public priorities of the legislature by allocating this scarce public resource called tax dollars. Consciously or unconsciously, and maybe consciously, because we all learned in Don's book that he actually considered divinity school. He really almost went to divinity school. And he was paraphrasing Matthew 6:21, and Matthew 6:21, I'm sure you all have it at the tip of your tongues, is look where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And if you look at where Bill Hobby's treasure is and has been, there's horses, and if you understand our family, that's the expense category that needs no explanation or apology or justification. It's just a horse thing. But other than horses, it's education. I mean, literally, period, full stop. I started the other day to make a list of schools that he has made meaningful contributions to, and I stopped at 20. And there's others I don't even know. I mean, Ohio State, Michigan, things that don't really suggest themselves regionally or because some family member went there. But, you know, he had a very patrician view of the world, and that the social escalator works through education, and access to it and access to opportunity is defined by education, and he lived it both on a policy basis and on a public resource basis and as a contributor. And so I'm very proud of what the hobby school's become. I'm very proud of the book that Erin and Don have done, because it does him fair justice. It does him fair justice. So I don't know, is that 5 minutes yet, or you want me to keep going? How are we doing, Ashley? No, thank you again for being here. And again, we're tremendously honored as a family to have this book completed during his lifetime, and to have the hobby school up and thriving and supported vigorously by the University of Houston. Thanks so much.
Let me say something about U of H before we do our conversation.
Okay. Would you like to do it now? Okay, I'll introduce and you can say. I have to wear these now. Oh, God. So this event is testament to the tremendous impact of our school's namesake, Bill Hobby, and the Hobby family on the University of Houston and our surrounding communities. It's also a testament to the power of perseverance and community, reflected in the room full of our students, faculty, and Hobby School, and UH supporters. The Hobby School in its short life has distinguished itself in public affairs education with a mission that aligns with Bill Hobby's legacy of public service and approach to public policy. This legacy of leadership and action lives on through our students and alumni. Tonight we'll have a discussion with Don, Carleton, and Erin Purdy, the biographers behind Bill Hobby, A Life in Journalism and Public Service. They'll take us through the journey from research to publication and highlights from the biography of a legendary lieutenant governor and just a remarkable man. After the discussion, we'll open it up to the audience for personal stories and questions. Now, before I introduce the speakers, Don, you wanted to make a comment?
Well, yeah, I want to say I'm asking for a special privilege here.
Go ahead.
Yeah. This is an unusual, sort of unique opportunity for me because I have 3 degrees from this university. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in political science. Dick Murray, I was in, I think, one of his first classes here. Dick, after he got here from LSU, I believe, wasn't it, Dick? And I got a master's degree, and then finally a PhD. So I have 3 degrees from this university, and this is really my first opportunity, amazingly enough, to say in a public forum how much I appreciate this university and the gratitude that I have for the opportunities that this school gave me. I grew up in Dallas, but I got to Houston as fast as I could, and literally. And I came here, I know this date is going to really, it's ancient history, so I got here as a freshman in 1965. And it was, an amazing city for me, and it was an amazing time for the university. It just become a state university the year before, and I fell in love with the place. But the more important thing is the fact that this place nurtured me. I had fantastic mentors in the history department. They're all gone now, unfortunately, except for Lawrence Curry, who's still with us, but Louis Kestenberg, Tom Morgan, I could name all of them. They were great. They were my mentors, and they really taught me. And I'm very grateful for it. And I wanted to take this opportunity to say this in public because I haven't had that chance before. So thank you, Jim.
And it's videotaped and recorded, so you're stuck. So about our speakers, Don Carleton is the Executive Director of the Briscoe Center for American History at the University of Texas at Austin. He's a historian. He's authored over a dozen books. He's also published numerous articles in professional journals, magazines, and newspapers. He serves as editor of the Focus on American History series at the University of Texas Press. Erin Purdy is the Executive Director of the Briscoe Center for American History at the University of Texas at Austin. She's a Cleveland native. She was curator at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Now, how cool is that? And museum. She's also editor-in-chief of Cleveland Magazine and a researcher and writer for the History Factory before moving to Austin. Initially hired at the Briscoe Center in 2005 as an oral historian, her responsibilities increased to managing the center's public outreach efforts, including exhibits, publications, and print and online communications. And with that, welcome to our authors.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Okay, the book is 432 pages long.
Sorry about that.
You said that before. I keep reminding you. Some of that is footnotes.
Still weighs a lot.
Which, by the way, Bill Hobby, when we were talking about doing this book, said, listen, I don't want this to be a puff job, and I want it to be scholarly with footnotes, but I want it readable, not in a way that's not scholarly. Yeah. So that's what we tried to do. So, but that's why, the footnotes added to it. So,
well, the prior book that you did, Don, called The Governor and the Colonel, he asked how long. What is it? It's 700 pages long. Something like that.
Okay, listen. Let me just tell you right now. If you buy The Governor and the Colonel, you get 2 books in one. It's a biography. It's a biography of Bill Hobby's father, and it's a biography of his mother, Ovida Cup Hobby, and you can't, I realized when I was writing the history, you can't separate those two. You can't understand one without the other. So that's the reason that book is. So look at it this way. It's like dual biographies. One biography is 300-something pages, and the other one's 300-something pages.
When he heard about the page link of the book of his parents, he said, boy, that's going to fly off the shelves.
Yeah, that's what he told me too. Yeah, that's what he told me too.
So the book contains dozens of photos, and this is for you, Don, the first question. Dozens of photos of the Hobby family and all kinds of other things. How did we get to today?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. In fact, one of the persons that was with me when all this happened was Laura Hobby, Beckworth. But we were at the Headliners Club. I don't know if you remember this or not. Yeah, okay. Of course you remember it. I'm the one that likely to forget things. And we were having dinner, and it was just I've had dinner with Bill and Laura and John Beckworth here. And I was it was unexpected. It just came out of left field. He said, I want you to write a history of the Hobby family. And I went, and I was in between a lot of other things and running the Briscoe Center and so forth. Anyway, but I thought about it, and I thought, that makes a lot of sense because I already know this story, a lot of aspects of this story, because my first book, which was my dissertation here at the University of Houston, is Red Scare, and it's about McCarthyism's impact on Houston. And Bill's mother, Ovita, and they, of course, on the Houston Post, attacked the foot soldiers of the Red Scare here in Houston through their newspaper and put a stop to a lot of the nonsense that was going on here. So I already knew that story, and I thought, okay, well, what the heck, so I tackled it. And as I got into it, I was shocked to find out that Bill's father, Will Hobby, who was governor of Texas during World War I, and was a very important governor in the history of this state, didn't really have a decent biography. I mean, hardly any secondary literature about him. And I realized, whoa, this is a bigger thing than what I thought I was getting into. And I realized he needed a biography. And so that shaped the whole thing. And so it became a biography. And I realized that this was going to be, a pretty long book. And that the other thing is I realized that Bill Hobby deserved his own biography. That we would be doing 2 books instead of 1. And that's how this all came about. And as far as Erin's input here, she played a key role because when I was working on The Governor and the Colonel, you were not at Texas State anymore.
Taking a break.
She was taking a break. She was in between jobs.
Didn't last long.
And I called her up and said, look, I need some editorial help, and could you jump in here? She edited Bill Hobby's memoir. And so I thought, well, she can hit the ground running here, So she gave me a lot of help as an editor for The Governor and the Colonel. And then when I finished that book, I turned on, started working on Bill Hobby's book. And you were back on the team. Well, not quite, but you were just, yeah. And when I asked her, I said, look, you know what, I need a co-author. Why don't you co-author this book with me? And the other thing about it is I knew she was going to take a little bit different approach than I was going to do on certain issues. And I thought that would strengthen the book. So that's how this all happened. And then while she was helping me with this, we turned it into a project at the Briscoe Center. And she came on board. And now she's taking over the place. She's the deputy executive director of the center. So
my master plan is working.
Yes. Yeah. Somebody said something about puppet master a minute ago. I was thinking anyway. So, but that's how this all happened.
Erin, talk about the intense research process and what were some of the most important sources?
Well, the research for this book was, so much of it was tied in with Governor and the Colonel, and Don had done extensive research, a lot of external libraries. But one of the things he was doing as well as that external research is meeting with Bill Hobby and having a series of interviews and conversations. So we had that as a starting point. We, of course, had Governor Hobby's memoir, which we've mentioned, but I was very spoiled. I started the research in 2020. And so right after I began working on the project, COVID hit. And which really would have hurt us had we not had incredible archival treasures at the Briscoe Center. So first and foremost, we are the home of Will Hobby's papers and Bill Hobby's papers. And so that alone was, a gold mine. I took over a conference room, had the whole papers there, and I just went through box by box. It was great. We also have a lot of other political and congressional collections that directly relate, news media collections that relate, people like Ann Richards, Lloyd Benson, Governor Dolph Briscoe, our namesake. We have all of their papers. Jess Hay, Don Adams, Molly Ivins, the Texas Observer. I could go on and on. So I was so fortunate that I could just literally sit in isolation and do a lot of research. But another thing we quickly realized, and Don knew, and I think that's part of the reason he asked me to help, was we need to do a lot of interviews. Oral history interviews are an incredible primary source. And we were able to tap into interviews that had been done, but we also knew we needed to do more. And I'm very fortunate because I say the name Bill Hobby and people just said, of course, yes, I will absolutely help. And many of you are here in the room today, some who I'm meeting in person for the first time because I interviewed you on Zoom or the phone because of COVID. So especially Paul and Laura and Kate, incredibly gracious. And without those interviews, I don't think we would have had some of the insights and some of the color and depth that the book really needed.
For sure, yeah.
So, I should also say, as long as we're celebrating people, I also have to thank Sarah Lee Teedy and Dolores Chambers, who were both incredible resources for us. And if we needed to reach someone or needed a piece of information or a photo or whatever, they were incredibly helpful, and that was also, I was a very spoiled researcher because of those people. So.
Sarah Lee was particularly an incredibly valuable source, and she tells it like it is. If you know Sarah Lee very well, she does, and she doesn't hold anything back, and it really smoothed out a number of things that we had to resolve in terms of painting pictures of things.
And things we would have missed.
Yeah.
I'm sure, even though it's 432 pages, there's a lot that's not in there. Each of you who knew Bill Hobby have your own stories and your own, angle and interpretation. So we did our best, and with those folks helping us, we hopefully didn't miss anything significant.
Any errors are
They're me.
That's why you have two people, delegate blame. Don, how did Bill Hobby's parents shape him?
Well, he was wired for politics. He grew up, his father, I've already mentioned, was governor of Texas. He was also lieutenant governor of Texas before he became governor. Paul Ferguson was removed from office, or he actually resigned, but he was one step ahead of impeachment. And Bill's father became governor. And then, of course, his first wife died. Will's first wife died, and he married Ovida, who there was a number of years between them in age, and but she was a very political person herself, and of course they owned the Houston Post, and were pioneers of the Texas newspaper industry, frankly. So, and of course they built a media empire as well, and KPRC Radio, KPRC TV, and several other media, businesses around the country. Anyway, he grew up in this atmosphere. He grew up in the middle of politics. It was almost like you couldn't avoid it. He went into, well, you'll talk about his education in just a minute, but it's almost like it was just fate. He was determined to be it. And, a lot of people grow up in politics, but they run away from it. There's other examples I know of families where a person's parents were very political and they didn't want any part of it. But not him. And I should add that it doesn't just stop with his parents. His family, the Hobby family, have been in, his grandfather was a senator, Texas senator, and it goes on and on. So in the first book, The Governor and the Colonel, I got into that genealogy. So, it's almost like you couldn't avoid it.
Right. Erin, what were some of the critical influence to Bill Hobby in his formative years?
Yeah, well, in addition to his parents and his family, as Don has discussed, part of I think we should mention too with his father. His father would take him visiting, He would go out with his dad and go around town and visit with other politicians, other media people. And I think that was really, the people that he got to know through his parents were certainly important. But I was really struck in the research at how important his education at St. Albans School was. And St. Albans is in Washington, D.C. It's connected to the National Cathedral. And Bill went there, I think, the final year that Ovida was in Washington. She was then head of the Army Corps for Women. And he thrived at St. Albans, and it was a wonderful culture for him. And that culture there was also reinforced by a professor named John Davis, who was a religion teacher, Spanish teacher, and became a very good friend, not just to Bill Hobby, but many of his classmates. And in that school, Bill was able to be an athlete. He played football, soccer, and basketball. He was in the government club. He was on the school paper. These were all really fulfilling for him. He stayed there even when Ovida returned to Texas. But one thing that really stood out was how the culture of faith at St. Albans influenced him. He became very religious. And he was a member of the vestry. He would get up early and set up the altar for church services. He got to know about the ceremony and the rituals of the church. In fact, we have a wonderful treasure trove of letters from John Davis. Bill had written to John, and at some point John returned all of those letters, so they're in the papers. And he spoke in the letter of wanting to take vows. He was interested in the priesthood. And while he never followed that through, I think there were lessons of faith and morality and integrity that were incredibly important that came out of that experience.
Ethics as well, ethics.
Yeah. So it was a really interesting lens to look at his childhood. I mean, some people, if they get sent away to a boarding school, they might be miserable. He was thriving in that environment.
So he has a fantastic experience in D.C.
Yes.
He's changing, becoming an adult, a young man. But what brings him back to Houston then? He could have stayed out there and gone to school in a variety of places. What made him come back to Houston?
Well, he came back to Rice. And I think part of the appeal of coming back to Houston was working at the Post. He continued to work at the Post. He had worked, I think he had, worked as a teenager.
He was. He grew up hanging around. He grew up hanging around the Houston Post. I think we can say that. Yeah.
And so I think the appeal of being able to, get his college degree, of course, but also work at the paper was great. In fact, he wrote to John Davis at a point when, I have to admit, I think he failed a math class and got pulled out of the newspaper. And he said to Davis, I'm bored with my schoolwork. I want to be a journalist. I want to be out doing the real thing. But he recommitted to his studies and came back from Rice. He was very active in the Rice paper and wrote some wonderful editorials. And then actually went into military service. So when we talk about him as his public service and the legacy, it doesn't just mean his service in government. He was also part of Navy intelligence. So those of you who know the show NCIS, right? He was part of the precursor to that intelligence. And it was thriving in D.C. as part of the military.
So he leaves the military, but then he's still working at the Post, but he becomes Senate parliamentarian, and he worked with Ben Ramsey. Mm-hmm. Now, how does that influence his future public service? You have a great little, in the book, you have a great anecdote about Ben Ramsey, who was quite the trickster.
So, we should explain a little context. He was called back from military service. He was in D.C., married Diana Stallings. They had a wonderful life in the D.C. area. But Ovida brought him back with the claim that he had to come help his poor old mother. His poor old mother, who we should add, ran the Post for like 20 more years. But she wanted his help because Will's health was failing. And it was time, and I think in her opinion, for Bill to come back and run the family business, which happened to be running the Post. So he was invited by Ben Ramsey, who was then lieutenant governor in 1959, to serve as parliamentarian. And Ben Ramsey this was his 5th term as lieutenant governor. He was pretty seasoned, and his style and his demeanor and his approach to government were incredibly influential. I think we said earlier, I read a speech by Lieutenant Governor Ramsey, and it could have been a speech by Lieutenant Governor Hobby, because it preached fiscal responsibility. It preached government as helping people, but being pragmatic. There were just these values that Ben Ramsey brought to the role of Lieutenant Governor that I think were incredibly influential. And then you mentioned the anecdote. Well, Bill learned how Ramsey used the rules of the Senate to run the Senate. Ramsey was incredibly adroit at working with the senators, managing the scheduling of legislation. He would look at bills to assign them to a particular committee, and if he didn't like a bill or he didn't think it had value, he would put it in his desk drawer, and he would say, I assigned it to the committee of and so Bill learned at the feet of a master, at someone who could work with the Senate, but also not be afraid to employ a little trickery if it helped get the job done.
A couple of things too. Also, remember his mother, Ovita, was a parliamentarian of the House before she was even old enough to vote. And so, so that also, he grew up knowing about, parliamentary. She even wrote a textbook about parliamentary rules that was in all the schools here in Texas.
Right.
So that was kind of another part of this, that he was already oriented toward this whole rule thing, because he'd read it as a kid. I mean, the parliamentary rules. So.
Right. I mean, and Ovita Culpabi, I mean, during the 30s, she was a great writer too. I mean, and Paul wrote a book recently called Glorious Tension, and I think he quotes his grandmother's speech in that too. So it's in the genes.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
So, why does he run for governor in 1972? And what were the main issues in 1972?
Well, I think part of that answer I've already pointed out. The politics was obviously, I don't know about in his genes, maybe so, but it was certainly maybe in the bloodstream, certainly in the brain. So he was going to run for something. The evidence is a little contradictory. There were a couple of interviews he did over the years where he said he never thought about running for public office. And then I talked to him, and he said he always wanted to run for public office. So, everybody's allowed some contradictions in their lives. Okay. But he was going to run, he was going to run. And of course, being with Ben Ramsey, I'm sure that sealed the deal. I also want to mention too, Ovita sent him, after he came back from the Navy, she sent him to cover the state legislature. That was one of his first reporting jobs. He was a correspondent for the Post at the legislature. So all this background, I mean, my gosh, it was kind of like it was hard for him to even avoid,
And we should also point out when he was covering politics for the Post, he was very focused on things like demographics and data and voting patterns. So this was baked in, okay? I'm glad he found you as a soulmate to understand how important, but I mean, even in his coverage of politics, we saw that very early on.
Well, he was very focused on math, for one thing,
But let's get to 72.
Well, yeah, but the point is, why did he run? And the reason he ran is because I think it was almost, it was written, as they say, okay. So he finally, what he wanted to do, he decided, this is as early as I think it was sometime around 1965 or so, he was dropping hints to reporters that he might run for lieutenant governor in 1966. So that was a trial balloon, and it popped. Nothing, it went nowhere. He even gave that little hint to a Dallas Morning News reporter because he wanted to see what the reaction would be outside of Houston. He was known in Houston because of his family, but it went nowhere. He didn't have name recognition in most of Texas. So he kept, looking for his opportunity, basically, is the best way to say it. And the other thing that held him back for a little while was Ben Barnes. He and Ben Barnes were good friends, but Ben Barnes had his own political aspirations that went all the way to the White House, actually. And so Ben was elected lieutenant governor in 1970, or actually he decided to run for become lieutenant governor, and Bill Hobby knew it. This was 1968, actually, in 1968. And so Bill wouldn't run against Ben Barnes in the primary. He wouldn't do it. So that was that for 68, because he decided, by the way, I didn't point this out, that the place that suited him the best was lieutenant governor, because he had been spent that time with Ben Ramsey. His father had been lieutenant governor, and so that's what he wanted to do. And he also knew from Ben Ramsey that lieutenant governor had a lot of power in the legislature, and that was an interesting thing for him to do as well. But anyway, so Ben Barnes becomes lieutenant governor in 1970, or in 68, and Bill knew that Ben Barnes was going to run for re-election in 70, so that knocked 70 out. Now remember, this is back when Texas officials had 2-year terms. It wasn't the 4-year term that we're familiar with now. So that's why this is rapidly happening. So then Bill realized that Ben Barnes was going to run for governor in 72. That left no incumbent in the lieutenant governors. So he thought, okay, this is my chance. I don't have to run against an incumbent. I don't have that problem. And so that's why he ran, and that's why he picked 72. And his opponents were 3 state senators. And one of them was Wayne Connolly, Governor John Connolly's brother, and he was the favorite. That's who thought he was going to become lieutenant governor. So that's why he ran, and he ran in 72, and he had to get name recognition. He had a tough task ahead of him, but eventually, and they had a little bit of a problem coming up with a good, campaign strategy, and then it sort of fell into his lap, and that's the shenanigans of Frank Sharp. You were at Laura, you were at a thing the other day, and I said John Sharp, and I thought, oh my God, John Sharp's going to call me. That I did not want. Okay, so Frank Sharp. And Frank Sharp, those of you who are longtime Houstonians may remember this. He was a land developer, a banker, an insurance tycoon, so forth, and he always sailed really close to the edge of the table, and in fact off the table. And he was indicted for fraud, stock fraud. And the problem, and how did this get into politics? And it's very complicated, so I'm going to try to cut to the quick. What happened was he wasn't putting enough money in his banks to cover the deposits that people had. He was making more loans than what money he had. And so the FDIC decided that they were going to withdraw his insurance, federal insurance, over his bank deposits, which would kill his bank. He had a state-chartered bank. And you know Sharpstown, that was his development. And so he came up with this scheme where he would get a bill passed in the state legislature that would free him up from having any obligations of getting federal insurance covering his deposits. And the way he figured out how he could get that law passed was to basically bribe several state legislators. They didn't call it bribes in the long shot, but it was a bribe. They were bribes. And so the SEC charged him and indicted him with stock fraud, because what he did is he went to several members of the state legislature and the governor, Preston Smith, and a former Attorney General, Wagner Carr, and on and on. We've got a whole list I could give you, but I won't. And said, look, this is how this is going to work. If you guys can get me a bill passed that will free me up from FDIC regulations, I will give you a loan of stock in my company, and then when the bill passes, you can sell it. Now, in the meantime, I'm going to give you a very low price stock, and during this period of time when you're considering the bill, I'm going to manipulate the stock price. And so while you're holding the stock, it's going to be literally, increasing in value as you hold it. And he did that, and that's another story. There's a whole fraud that he did with the Catholic Church here. But anyhow, the point is, he did do that, manipulate the stock. So the senators and Preston Smith and everybody else cashed in immediately and pocketed really great profits off of these the stock without any investment or anything else. And so he got his bill passed, surprise, surprise. And then the weird thing is, that's when the SEC hit him. And so the whole scandal, he was indicted, and then, of course, then it hit the newspapers, and Bill saw the news, and he knew a little bit had heard rumors. And so what happened was that Bill Hobby realized that many members of the legislature were tainted by this corruption, and that he had the really good platform now, and that was honesty. He said he was thinking, the whole stock scheme fraud was too complicated for most voters to understand. I'm having trouble explaining it to you myself. And he said, but what people do understand is dishonesty and the importance of honesty. And that became his campaign slogan. The bumper sticker, the signs on the road and so forth, the billboards, was Bill Hobby will make a great lieutenant governor, honestly. And that was pretty much, so he actually he came in first in the primary. He didn't win enough votes to win it cleanly. And Wayne Conley came in second, and so they had a runoff. They had a very nasty campaign. Wayne Conley it was a really nasty campaign. And he also had the benefit of his brother's political machine in Texas. But Bill prevailed. He beat him by nearly 250,000 votes. And he was all of a sudden lieutenant governor. He had no opposition in November because the Republican Party didn't run candidates at that particular point in political history here in Texas. It was a one-party state, as you know. So I'm sorry for the long-winded explanation, but it's one of those things where it's hard to explain. But anyway, stock fraud.
Erin, you and Don capture his personality throughout the book, and I think one of the things that's really great about the book is it's filled with facts, but his humanity and what he was like and is like comes through all over the place. Signature bow ties, love of data, introverted, few words, lots of action, straight to the point, and sometimes abrupt. How did his colleagues characterize his leadership style in the Senate?
I think there was so much respect for him and what he represented. To a person, the people that we've interviewed, the stories that we've read, everyone recognized his integrity and how deeply he cared about what he was doing and how good he was at what he was doing. I think one of the things he did that they talked about was his ability to create compromise. If there were senators that had strongly held opinions and they were in opposition of each other, he would sit them down in his office. They called it being called to the principal's office, but he'd sit them in his office and force them to come up with a compromise or come up with a solution. And that technique really worked well for him. There's a great story about that Bill Sarpalius tells. And when Bill Sarpalius was a freshman senator, he wanted to introduce a bill this was in the 80s, and drunk driving was a really big problem. And one of the steps that was being suggested was to raise the drinking age at that time from 18 to 19. And there was a senior senator named Walter Mad Dog Mangden. And I should mention that Mad Dog was not one of Bill's favorite senators. In fact, they had gotten sideways in the 70s when Mad Dog was threatening to have a filibuster to shut down the constitutional reform efforts that were a pet project of Bill Hobby's. And so Mad Dog's threatening this filibuster, and Hobby said to him very bluntly, "You can make an ass of yourself, but you can't make an ass out of the Senate."
Yeah.
Fast forward to the 80s, and here's Mad Dog trying to pass this increase in the drinking age, and he's not getting anywhere in the first session where he introduces it. Bill Sarpalius had campaigned on this issue and went to introduce the bill as a freshman senator himself. And he managed to submit his bill before Mad Dog did. And so that really upset Senator Mengden, and the two of them were feuding over whose bill was going to prevail. So Hobby calls him into his office, and he listens to both sides. He's already hinted to Sarpalius, he's already taken him under his wing as one of his allies. And he already, as we said, had gotten sideways with Mad Dog. So he said, look, you both have made your case. The only way to decide this is to flip a coin. So he reaches in his pocket, grabs a coin, tells Mad Dog, call it, tails. Flips the coin, and it just so happens to fall back behind him. And when Hobby goes to look at it, he goes, oh, Sarpalius, it's your, you win. Mad Dog's like, wait, I didn't see the coin. Nope, sorry.
Take my word for it.
Sarpalius won.
Yeah.
And so how can you argue with a 50-50 chance on a coin toss, right? But it was a great example of how not only did he create compromise with these meetings in his office, but he also knew his allies. He knew who he wanted to support and keep close. He rewarded them with positions as committee chairs, and he just was such a master in terms of his leadership style of maneuvering these personalities. Imagine 31 politicians and trying to get them to all agree. That he was able to do so is a real tribute to how well he could work people.
Yeah, and I know I spy a few people in here who knew who Mad Dog was and remember Mad Dog. So.
The book has several examples. So you've heard the Ben Ramsey example, now you've heard the coin flip example. There's others where it's a way to win and reward the people that are doing the right thing. If you're a pain in the, he's not going to tolerate that much.
Yeah.
And he just would.
Yeah, plus Mad Dog was a diva, which was really great.
That would really upset him.
because he was a grandstander in the Senate, and he would just go on. He'd have special privilege. He'd go on and on and on about whatever conspiracy thing he was believing in, And Lieutenant Governor Hobby had to sit there and listen to that, and So he wasn't a real popular guy with Governor Hobby.
Hobby also was not above using his powers as punishment. And if you got cross with him or if you got sideways with him, there was a Senator, Hector Uribe, who was critical of Hobby very publicly, actually called him a liar, which is, a pretty tough thing to tell the Lieutenant Governor. And it's amazing how in the next session after Senator Uribe did that, he lost his position on the Finance Committee. So the power of appointment that Hobby had as Lieutenant Governor, again, a great example of where knowing the rules enabled him to move things through, but also support what he wanted to support.
Yeah, and he and Uribe became good friends, though, later.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, one thing we could add in the book, too, even people that he was very close, like Don Adams. I mean, there was an instance with a filibuster. I want you to, when you read it, you'll just laugh about how he tricked him out of doing the filibuster because he hated filibusters. Mm-hmm. So, Don, tell us about the Killer Bees incident. Governor Hobby has reflected that was probably the biggest mistake he made as lieutenant governor.
Well, it's the Killer Bees episode. What was going on here is that there was in 79. There was a big battle here, and this is, again, you're going to have to stick with this. This is inside baseball, so it's a little harder to explain. But anyway, let's suffice it that there was a big battle over workers' compensation, and there were many issues involved. But they finally got through. Hobby, they've been battling in the legislature forever over this. It was like public school financing. They could never come up with an answer. Business didn't want workers' comp, any liberal workers' comp stuff. Trial lawyers did, because they could represent the injured worker and so forth. So, Bill Hobby kind of refereed this thing in the Senate, and he finally got it, to a place where he thought that he could get a bill passed and get this thing going and done. And Actually, I've got the workers' comp mixed up with the killer bees.
It was actually related to
Yeah, it wasn't, it was let me get back, it was the dual primary, I'm sorry.
Yes.
And the dual primary, which is also inside baseball, is what happened on that was John Connally was running for the nomination of the Republican Party for presidency. And he asked that a law be passed that would make for 2 different primaries when he was running. His opponents, of course, were Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. And Connally thought that he could get conservative Democrats, because he had been a member of the Democratic Party when he was governor, that he could get conservative Democrats to vote for him in a special primary only for the presidency. In other words, you would separate the presidential primary away from the regular primaries, the Democratic primary and the Republican. Under Texas law, you could go and vote in this presidential primary, even if it was the Republican primary, and you could still come back on the regular primary and vote as a Democrat. Otherwise, it was against the law. You couldn't vote in the Republican primary and then also go vote in the Democratic. Okay, so they got, Hobby decided he'd take care of the bill through the Senate for Connally. He and Connally weren't great friends, okay, let me just put it that way. And he later said that the reason he was carrying this bill is because he thought it would give Texas more power nationally in the presidential races and so forth. So he got where he was going to get the bill done. Well, the liberal Democrats in the Senate were totally opposed to this bill. A lot of them were trial lawyers, and they weren't going to go for it. But he had the votes. Hobby had the votes. So they got together and said, okay, let's deny the Senate a quorum. Let's all disappear. Let's go away. Let's leave Austin. Let's abandon this. They didn't tell Hobby this. Some of the senators who were leading this, one of them was Babe Schwartz of Galveston, and who was a good friend of Bill Hobby's, by the way. So they disappeared, and Hobby comes in ready to pass the bill, and these senators are all missing. He realizes there's no quorum. They can't vote on the bill. So they disappear. Hobby figures out real fast what's going on here, and they only had 5 days to get this thing passed. So the rules of the Senate allowed for the Senate to vote to let the Department of Public Safety go and find these senators, these fugitives, and haul them back to the Capitol. And so they voted, and so they went out to search for them, all these senators. Well, they were all hiding in a garage apartment in West Austin, and except one was a lawyer in Brownsville, and he went across the Rio Grande River and was in Mexico. And another senator, Chet Brooks, was trying a case up in Dallas, or was involved in something in Dallas, and he went to Oklahoma. All right, the rest of them were crammed in this one bedroom. There were 12 senators, so there were 10 of these senators crammed in this one bedroom garage apartment. And they couldn't find it, the DPS couldn't find them. Lieutenant Governor Hobby went nuts about this. This violated everything he thought about efficiency and law enforcement, and he started telling the newspapers that it was a heck of a thing that the Department of Public Safety and Texas Rangers could not find 10 prominent politicians in Texas. So word got out. Gene Jones, the senator from Houston, had claustrophobia, and he had to flee this one-bedroom apartment. He got to Houston, and somehow the DPS found out about this. They raced down here with Hobby hovering over them, okay? And their reputation is greatly at stake, okay? They come down here, and they found his house, found Gene Jones's house. They couldn't go inside because they couldn't get a warrant to get him. So they all hung outside and hid. And they thought, well, he'll probably go and get his newspaper in the morning, the Houston Post. Sure enough, guy comes out, picks up the paper. As he's going back to the house, all these cops, all these state police fall on him. And they grab him, haul him off, take him to a DPS helicopter, fly him immediately to the Capitol, land on the Capitol grounds, haul him off the helicopter. And the sergeant at arms of the Senate comes out to greet him, and Hobby's coming down. He's so excited that they got one of them anyway. And they come in, Sergeant at Arms looks at him, these DPS officers are on both sides, and he goes, "That's not Gene Jones." Well, it wasn't. It was his brother. And he tried to tell them that on the helicopter, and it didn't. They had their man, okay, the Mounties, okay, had their man. Well, Bill Hobby went nuts, okay? I mean, it's like, you know, they couldn't find their rear end with two hands, with both hands. And so he was very unhappy, and that led him, he just finally had to, they worked out a deal where he just basically agreed to not put the bill on the floor. And that's how they came back. But am I getting the killer bees mixed up with the?
No, you got it.
Yeah, I got that.
It was a really interesting turning point for Hobby as a leader.
It was, because, by the way, he called them the killer bees because at that time there was a lot of publicity about the killer bees coming up from Brazil and coming up through Central America and Mexico, and they're coming after us. And he was really fascinated with that story. And so when the senators disappeared, he started telling the newspaper reporters, "They're killer bees, they're killing me, you know? And so the reporters picked that up and started talking about the killer bees that had disappeared. And so he lost that. And it was a low mark, and he admits a low mark in his years as lieutenant governor. He learned from it. Yes. And he told me, he said one of the main things he learned was not to mess with the Senate rules, not to manipulate it, to do whatever he wanted to do. He couldn't run the Senate that way. And he learned from it. It was, the other thing, fast forward 10 years, 10th anniversary of the Killer Bees, 1989, the senators all gathered in Schultz's Beer Garden in Austin to have an anniversary celebration. And this was all a setup, okay? And they're having their beers, and the DPS come in there and arrest them and haul them off to the Senate chamber where Bill is waiting in a beekeeper suit. The whole regalia, okay? Hat, screen off that. And they just had a great time. But it was his way of showing, look, I messed up, okay, guys? And all is forgiven, and they had a great time, actually. So,
which was one of the reasons why they respect him, because he was willing to, don't get stuck on stupid. He really would stop.
That's right.
Erin, how is an example of bipartisan leadership?
So we have to remember that when we talk about bipartisan, the culture in Texas in the 70s and 80s is very different than our current culture. The kind of animosity we have between Republican and Democrats, there certainly, was opposition, but it's a very different time. Hobby was a staunch Democrat. He described himself as born and bred as a Democrat. He worked very hard campaigning on behalf, not just for himself, but on behalf of other Democrats. He and Lloyd Benson and Jess Hay, for example, were very powerful figures in the 80s working on behalf of the Democratic Party. But once senators, once they were elected and once they became senators, he looked at them as potential partners and allies. And so he would look for people with talent and substance. And when we mentioned before the importance of appointing people to committees, that was an important power that he really used masterfully. And he would appoint Republicans to head up committees as a way to recognize talent and recognize that substance. So the other thing is the Republican Party was beginning its ascendancy, not just nationally, but in Texas. And for the first time, there was a Republican governor. Well, not the first time, I'm sorry, because was Clements the first?
Well, Bill Clements was the first since Reconstruction.
Yes.
Edmund Davis was a Republican,
That's
but
right.
It was a different kind of Republican.
A different kind of Republican,
yes.
Yeah. So Clements was governor off and on during the time that Hobby was lieutenant governor. And Hobby didn't like Clements. And he rarely spoke badly of people. he would speak badly of Clemens. He just did not care for him. He was from a different party, different priorities, different approach, but yet they would still meet every week. They would have these breakfast meetings. There's pictures of them hunting together. They knew they had to collaborate to make state government work.
Yes.
And that is something that I think is instructive to us. You can have two parties, and while they might have very different ideals or very different goals, you can still find compromise. And Hobby was really good at doing that regardless of the political party affiliation.
He was constantly seeking consensus. He was a consensus person. I meant everything to him, and he had to work with Republicans to get a consensus. And I should add something. He and Clemens got along better Clemens' first term. Actually, it was Clemens after Clemens beat Mark White. Mark White beat Clemens, and then Clemens came back and beat Mark White. And it was that second term when the blood really flowed, when they didn't get along at all. But Clemens liked him better than Bill Hobby liked Clemens. It's really interesting because in 1982, when George Strait Jr. challenged Bill Hobby, really the first challenge Bill Hobby, and the only really serious challenge he had in a re-election campaign, except for that first one, but I'm talking about a re-election campaign, because George Strait Jr. had been Secretary of State in Texas. He had a lot of money, son of an oil man, and it was a real challenger. And he, thought that Governor Clements would openly support him when he was running against Bill Hobby, and Clements didn't. Clements actually tried to talk him out of running against Hobby because he didn't want Hobby defeated. Yeah. Because he felt like he was working okay with Hobby. It was just interesting dynamic there, and Strait, really didn't have the support of of Clements' team at all when he ran. Clements didn't come out against him, and Clements didn't endorse Hobby. But I mean, behind the scenes, he kept his mouth closed. He really didn't lift a finger to help Strait.
You capture that one anecdote in the book about him debating George Strait about having another.
Yeah, they had a debate, and this is a good example of Bill Clements' dry wit.
Bill Hobby.
Bill Hobby, I'm sorry. There's too many Bills there.
I know.
Bill Hobby's dry wit and his ability to concisely cut you just in a sentence almost. And so they had a debate at the PBS station in Dallas, KERA-TV. And so they had this, and it was only, I think there were several candidates who had debates at that program. So they only allotted 15 minutes for the lieutenant governor. So Bill Hobby and George Strait Jr. And so Strait got so frustrated in this 15 minutes that he finally spoke out and he said, listen, we cannot discuss these issues in only 15 minutes. This is on the air. And he said, I'm willing to go into the commercial stations, this is a PBS station, to the commercial stations and spend a lot of money and buy time for us to debate real issues and spend all the time that we need. I need more than 15 minutes. And then the camera cut to Bill Hobby. I said, save your money, George. You can tell us everything you know about state government in 15 minutes. Well, that was actually a devastating thing. I've talked to some of the journalists at the time, and they were going, that was a devastating, but that was a classic example of Bill Hobby, the way he could come up with something and zip.
So I want to get to the audience, but one final question deals with his relation with UH and being interim chancellor. So Erin, would you both start and talk about how it happened and what the consequences were?
Well, after Hobby retired or left office, he really moved into academia. He'd always been, of course, an advocate for higher ed, but he was at the LBJ school at UT, and I believe he got a phone call. Is Beth still with us?
Well, no, Beth is gone. I think Beth
she's gone.
Roberts.
Okay, well,
Anyway, no, she got an appointment.
She got an appointment.
Yeah.
So why don't you go ahead and?
Well,
You're the grad. You're the.
Well,
you
no,
tell
it was well, Bill was also teaching at Rice also.
Yes.
He was teaching at Rice, and he was also teaching at the LBJ school. And so Beth Robertson, who was here earlier, was chair of the board of the University of Houston Board of Regents. And this is 1995. And she came to see him in his office at the LBJ school. And she said, look, the University of Houston is a disaster. It is a total and complete mess. The president of the Central Campus and the provost of the Central Campus have just resigned in protest. The system is completely messed up. The current chancellor is going to resign tomorrow. This place is going to be leaderless, and we need your help. And I've been authorized by the Board of Regents to offer you the position of chancellor, of interim chancellor, with the whole idea that you would come in and clean this mess up for us. And he thought to himself, he told me, he said, I thought, well, wait a minute, why would I want to take a job like that? You know, it's kind of like jumping into the tiger's den or something, you know. But he said, you know, I thought about it, and he said, you know, my family loves Houston. They've played a big role in making Houston what it is. And Houston's a first-class city, and it deserves a first-class public university. So I'll do what I can. So he came in, and his goal basically was to study the system, the University of Houston system, straighten out its, restructure it, and he immediately fired two vice chancellors, called them in his office, fired them. He closed down their very, very expensive offices in a downtown skyscraper in downtown Houston, closed them down, and essentially what he finally did, with the board's approval, was that he combined the position of chancellor and president, moved the system back to this campus, and basically reduced a lot of the expenses and much of the duplication in administrative services that were going on here. And so, and pulled them out of the crisis. And then he was able to hand the job off to the president of the University of Utah, who came in. And the other things he did when he was here, because of his, and the Board of Regents here at the U of H wanted him, they hoped he would do something like this, but they were very interested in his legislative influence. He was not a lieutenant governor anymore, but he had been out of office just very shortly. And so he went to the legislature, and he was able to get the legislature, persuaded them to fund the superconductivity center that is world class here now. He got them to do that, and then he also got the state legislature to donate the prison farm land and sugar land to build a campus for a branch of, not make another new school, but to make it a branch of the Central U of H, and that's how the sugar land thing. So he's responsible for all of that, saving the school in many ways. Legislature was getting ready to intervene in the University of Houston, and Hobby didn't want that, and that would not have been a good thing. Okay, and so he really saved the University of Houston in many ways. This might have been a different institution if it hadn't been for Bill Hobby. He needs a statue here.
Well, he has.
He won't hold his.
Well,
He won't let you do it. But.
He may not need a statue because we have a hobby school.
Right. Well, on top of that, yes.
Put a statue in front of the new building.
But you need to put the statue in front of the new building. Anyway, that was what he did for the University of Houston.
Well, I just wanted to add, I think we don't have time right now to get into the details of how he helped with the hobby school, helped the hobby.
Your chapter captures it pretty well.
So you could either read the book or you can listen. We talked about it in our podcast that you recorded today. Yeah. So you could listen to the Hobby School podcast and learn a little bit more. But it is safe to say, I think I'll speak on your behalf, that when we were looking at Hobby's legacy and why does he matter and what did he contribute, one of the most important things that stood out is the Hobby School. And so it really is a capstone to his legacy and to his legacy of service. And I know he would be delighted. We met a bunch of the Hobby Fellows before this event. He would have been delighted to get to know you all and support you as you start your work in the legislature. As I told many of you, read the book and then you can run the place.
Yeah, right. It's a guidebook, no handbook.
Learn from Bill Hobby, and you will run the Senate, I promise.
Okay, we need to get the audience involved. So Celeste Zamora is going to be Phil Donahue. If you're under the age of 50, you won't know what that means, but she's going to go around with a microphone, and you can ask a question, make a personal statement.
Hi, thank you again for coming out to speak. Very informative talk. You said you did a biography on Paul Hobby and Bill Hobby. Have you done or published any work on the original Hobby from the 1870s who served in the Texas State Senate?
Well, actually, when Don's first draft of the governor and the colonel, and I can say this because I did the editing, had quite a bit of information about the early Hobby family, going back even further, going back, you went back to the 1600s, I think. And
Briefly.
Briefly. I think that there could be more, certainly, written than what made in the final book, The Governor and the Colonel, because it is an interesting story. We ended up trimming it down just for sake of space, but
And still came out.
there are so many. The Civil War stories alone are phenomenal.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know, maybe we need a journal article or something. That's a great question. As we've established, I think the family's legacy of service is just incredible, and
Yeah.
there's a lot more to be explored.
Yeah, there's something I want to add about his importance, about Bill Hobby's. Bill Hobby's importance to me, given the world we live in today, is Bill Hobby's legacy should be that he's a role model for public service, for unselfish public service. He didn't have to do any of this. It's like a Kennedy or a Rockefeller. It's not like he had to go, get a job someplace else or whatever. He was working for the people. I'll be very candid and honest with you. We agreed that we would do an objective biography. Bill Hobby told me he didn't want a hagiography. Paul said the same. You and I had a talk about that. Paul, I have to say, the Hobby family never had any censorship on us whatsoever. And he just, we couldn't find anything, any skeletons in the closet. If they're there, they're so well hidden. I don't believe they are, okay? But we did look, all right? This was not my first time on the rodeo. I've written other books, and written them as what I found, and sometimes it's wasn't that great. And this isn't true with Bill Hobby. The guy's he should be a role model for everyone, and all the folks, the kids, the students, I should say, who are in the school, Jim, they should look at him as a role model, I think.
When you name a school or a college after somebody, it's someone that has means and things like that, and someone that they've achieved a lot. But the heartbeat of the Hobby School reflects his approach to so many things. So, and that's actually what we try to instill with our students is like, be like him. Yeah. Remember the commercial with Michael Jordan, be like Mike? Be like Bill Hobby. And when you read the book, you're going to understand what we're talking about up here. You're going to see what he's like.
What a guy to have your center named for.
Well, I'm not invited to speak again, I know, but I'm just going to punctuate that answer with the way I think about this. All you smart young people know what Lord Acton's dictum is. Nod, yes, you do. Lord Acton's dictum is all power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, if Lord Acton comes back to earth, he's going to have to deal with Bill Hobby because it's true most of the time, but there are important exceptions. And, his credo was simply to do the next right thing. And if Don couldn't find it, we couldn't find it either.
No, it's not there. I'm confident of that. Back over here.
One thing that stood out to me based on Lieutenant Bill Hobby's life was just how data-driven he was and how good he was with money. What are some formative experiences that led him to that, and his successes as a lieutenant governor during his time?
Yeah, I think again, I would look to his father's example and to Ramsey, Ben Ramsey, just in terms of, I guess, in terms of the philosophical approach to the budget, which is it's great, and this goes back to the hobby schools mandate, right? It's great to think about what's possible and what's ideal, but what's real? And what's realistic and what can actually get done? And so I think because he had that pragmatic approach and he had learned from his father's example, but especially Ben Ramsey's, the budget, he knew, and I think it's been said, maybe not tonight, I can't remember, but that, you know, it's basically about an appropriations bill, that the role of the state government has to do with money. He understood how the primacy of that. And so the idea of being fiscally careful, I think was just a part of that pragmatic approach that he had to government. So that's a great question, though, and
Yeah.
I'd probably want to ask also some of his colleagues and peers if they had other insights on that.
Could I add something with that? Because
Yeah, please.
this word pragmatism is being used. So at the hobby school, when we wrote the vision statement in 2012 for the school, we weren't a school, we were a center. The two pillars were data analysis, quantitative training, and ethics training. Ethics meaning ethics in research, but also learning the difference between values, because you can't separate data analysis from values. You just can't. But that was based on many conversations with him. But when we talk about pragmatism, with Bill Hobby, there's a zone you don't go into. So there's an ethical line you don't cross. And I think there was an example about an attempted robbery by Pilgrim Chicken.
Yeah, Bo Pilgrim.
Yeah, it's in the book. I mean,
Yeah.
No, Bo Pilgrim.
Bo Pilgrim was handing out
anything even bring
donations.
any disgrace to the Senate, you were in trouble.
Yeah. He was giving out 10,000. Bo Pilgrim, who had a chicken company up in Northeast Texas, he was the largest seller of chicken products in the United States. And he hated that work. That's how I got off in the workers' comp thing. And he hated the workers' comp bill because it was going to allow trial by jury if you took your case, if you appealed your case that the insurance board turned you down. And so he winds up, Bill's at lunch and he winds up on the floor of the Senate and he's handing out $10,000 checks to the senators. And like you said,
some of them took the checks.
Yeah, and like you said, he that just totally offended Bill on every level, everything, ethics, but number one, he was embarrassing the Senate.
Yes. I think we have one over there.
So I'm curious. I worked for Bill Hobby in the mid-'70s, started as an intern, worked a couple of years. From that, it led me to work for one of the leading lobbyists in Austin while I was in law school, but always kept up with the office. And I'm curious, is there anybody here that worked for Bill Hobby in the mid-'70s? Larry Veselka, Barbara LeBaron. Okay. There's not many of us left, I guess, but I have a couple of photos I want to show you here afterwards. One of Governor Hobby and me that did involve alcohol.
In the 70s in the Senate? What?
Trust me, it's...
Where they had margarita machines in the hallway.
It was also the time I have an incredible picture that was taken. I flipped through the book here, it's not in there. It was taken by Governor Hobby as Bob Cargill was flying him back to Houston, a place called the Chicken Ranch, which you young people have no idea what that was. He gave a couple of us, I think he gave it to me because I went to A&M, and he asked me, did you ever go there? And I didn't answer the question.
I should explain for those who don't know, the Chicken Ranch had nothing to do with chicken.
No.
Thank you.
It did have to do with, I don't know.
Friends.
Making friends. Friends that you paid.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, but
Best little.
Running out of euphemisms.
Yeah. Best little whorehouse in Texas,
Yeah.
based on the chicken wing.
I learned a lot from Governor Hobby. I'm not going to go into all that and the way he handled people, but I guarantee you, in the history of Texas, he's got to be the only politician when you walked in his office, there were copies of Scientific American magazine. I kid you not. It was not unusual to walk into his office, and for you young people, he was using something called a slide rule. Y'all don't know what that is. That's amazing. But he was clearly a different type of person, and he never let his upbringing impact his interaction with the staff. And for me, you know, raised dirt poor on a farm outside of Waco, Texas, little town of McGregor. You know, the whole educational system offered me a way up. I was a National Merit Scholar. That wasn't enough, but here comes A&M and offered me a great scholarship, and through that, I was the first Aggie to go to the LBJ school. And I just hope for those of y'all that get into politics, there needs to be a fight in this state. There needs to be a fight for the average young person gets the opportunity to get the experiences I did. And I know some of y'all are going to think that I'm smoking crack, but I'm not. I went through A&M. I was a summa cum laude graduate. I went to the LBJ school, also the first Aggie that went to LBJ and UT Law School. And all 8 or 9 years of that, my tuition was $50 a semester. Don't shake your heads. That's what we paid because the state believed in educating the young people. And I taught part-time out here for 20 years, and it appalled me to see how much students were paying just to go to school. Student loans, so maybe someday we can come back to that, but you know, for you young people, I would urge you to read and study about Bill Hobby because he knew what was important. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Somebody back over here. A student over here.
She's next.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
I hate to follow that because this is just a frivolous memory that was triggered by the question about fiscal responsibility. I used to be a journalist covering the legislature, and my boss, Virginia Ellis, wanted to do an interview with Governor Hobby, and he decided the best route would be to go to lunch together. And they went to a restaurant in Austin, and he pulled out a 2-for-1 coupon.
Oh, no, I have one better. It actually is about fiscal responsibility and efficiency. The first time I met with him in Austin, we were talking about the promotion of his book, and I said, well, what time would you like to meet? And he said, well, the Greyhound arrives at 11:30. And I said, ha, 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 ha. Okay, but really, what time would you like to meet? And he said, no, the Greyhound arrives at 11:30. He would take the Greyhound bus. So imagine, former lieutenant governor, and he took it because it was affordable, and also it was the most efficient way for him to get from his home in Houston to Austin.
Well, it was even better than that. It was a was it Megabus? What?
Megabus?
Megabus, yeah.
But it was, I mean, he was fiscally responsible, and I think, Paul, you've mentioned this, not just for the state, but personally. He was careful with his finances, let's say.
Yeah, there's a million stories about Bill Hobby. Just quickly, to give you some idea about his wry humor, because he was picking on me about something. We were flying to Washington. He was going to do a book signing. Ben Barnes was sponsoring a book signing for his book, How Things Really Work. And I was flying up there with him in a family plane. And we were flying over Dallas because I was looking out the window there and I could see downtown Dallas. And we were flying over Bonham, Texas, and Fannin County, and that's where the Sam Rayburn Library is. And we run the Sam Rayburn Library as one of the Briscoe Center's units. And I looked out the window, and he was sitting there in the, and I said, oh, look there, there's the Sam Rayburn Library down there. We're flying over there. And he said, you know, I said, you know, the congressman from this district is Ralph Hall. And, you know, and this is like 30 years after, you know, the campaign or the election. And I said, you know, the congressman down there is Ralph Hall. I know him. Oh, I said, of course, you know him too, Bill. I said, actually, he ran against you in 1972. Hobby looks like this. And I said, I forgot that. He ran against you in 1972. And Hobby looked at me and goes, I haven't forgotten it.
I mean, the bus ride stories, I mean, it was,
Yeah.
after we did it like 2 or 3
We could do a
times
book
together.
of nothing
Yeah.
but Bill Hobby
And I remember
stories.
I finally
Yeah.
got the 3rd trip, I said, I'm not going anywhere. I said, I'm tired of living like a grad student. And so, yeah, and then one time he came back from a trip and he said, the bus driver got lost, and I got him back on the right road. One last question?
Hi, my name is Dulce. I'm a public policy student and my minor's media studies. First off, thank you guys so much for this. I'm looking forward to reading the book. I just wanted to ask, my interest is like media research. I wanted to ask, how do you guys think that his experience in growing up with like the media and like working for the Post, really like those transactional skills to be able to communicate to the community, how that helped him like shape his approach to good governance and bipartisanship, and how can we bring those like the media literacy and like just those skills to utilize mass communication in a educational way to bring it to the hobby school, and yeah, that's all I want to say. But thank y'all.
Well, it's obviously we've talked a lot about the influence of his parents and working on the Post and serving as a journalist. I think at the time, things are a little bit different now in terms of the media, not a little. They're a lot different in terms of the media landscape. What was important to remember about the Houston Post and working there and writing things like editorials, op-eds, that sort of thing, those had huge power. And a lot of times, newspapers were working on behalf of certain causes. They were boosters of communities, of economic development. And so I think that his training as a journalist taught him, first of all, to be able to articulate those ideas clearly. He understood the need to make sure to communicate in ways that the majority of people could understand. He didn't write in a lot of jargon. He never spoke at length. He was very concise and very to the point. I think in some ways, the way that the media landscape is now, it is a huge challenge, and it is a very different world. I don't know how he would have done with things like social media. I don't know that that would have been something he would have embraced, frankly. I don't think that was his own style, but he would have recognized the power of it, and he would have worked on ways to use that power for the benefit of others. So I think that what's interesting to me, and I work in communications for the center as well, and have worked as a journalist, it's just that things have changed so much. It's hard to compare the power of a newspaper like the Post or the Houston Chronicle even to what we have today, because it is so fractured. There's so many voices. The good news is it is so fractured. There are so many voices. There's room for all of you as students to use your own social media channels for good. You can be the Bill Hobby writing an op-ed for the Post, but you have an audience baked in terms of your followers and what you do. So I would encourage you to, even if the landscape is different, your choices can be based on ethics, based on your beliefs, based on your principles, and you can communicate in that way. I think we all would love to see more constructive communication. It's a tough world right now, especially post-election, but I would advocate that using your own platform can be a way that you can embody some of the principles that Hobby represented.
Hear, hear.
One last question. Ramona, go ahead.
You referred to him as an introvert. And I keep thinking, my goodness, he was an introvert, but look what he did to be an introvert. When he first started campaigning, he asked Senator Adams from East Texas to be his campaign manager. And the senator said, Bill, I've never run a campaign in my life except my own in East Texas, and we didn't even raise money. It was self-funded. He said, oh, you can do it. And he said, well, you're going to have to be out there in the public talking to people and traveling around a lot and shaking a lot of hands and giving a lot of speeches. And he said, well, I can give you Wednesday afternoons. So maybe you can expand on his campaign style.
You know, it's funny. I think public speaking was a challenge for him initially, but he worked at it. And he actually worked at his speech ability when he was younger. In his childhood papers, we found vocal exercises that he did to try to improve how he spoke. And so, you know, much has been made. He was known to have a stutter, a stammer. And I think more has been made of that than I don't know, I feel like he was able to overcome that. But he did keep his public speaking concise and short and to the point. And in fact, people loved having him on a panel because unlike what we've done tonight, he kept things short. He stayed on time. If he said he was going to talk for 5 minutes, he spoke for 4. And I think that you know, there's such a mastery of communication to be able to get your point across, especially on these really complicated issues, in that short of a way. So I think he was an excellent public speaker, and his speech is still, the quality of the writing is.
Yeah, the writing is, yeah, he's a
writing.
wordsmith, there's no question about that.
Yeah.
Well, we invite you to a book signing outside, and there'll be food, and I want to thank Don and Erin for this fantastic book. It's terrific.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Thank you.